I'm Desmond, 32 years old, standing in my parents' lavish Connecticut mansion for what should be a standard inheritance division. Growing up with my sister Rebecca, I've always been second best in my parents' eyes despite my best efforts. Today I expected fairness from the $5 million inheritance following Grandpa Harrison's passing. Instead, my father William announced everything was going to Rebecca, my mother Eleanor nodding approvingly as she told me to work harder. The betrayal cut deep, but nobody expected what my grandfather had secretly planned. Before I continue this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button, because what my grandfather did next changed everything in ways no one saw coming. Growing up in Fairfield County, Connecticut meant privilege by most standards, but emotional wealth was something our family mansion couldn't provide. My father William built his real estate development company from a modest foundation he inherited from Grandpa Harrison. Dad was stern, demanding, and perpetually disappointed in me, saving his rare smiles for Rebecca. Real men don't need constant validation, he'd tell me whenever I sought his approval. Yet he praised Rebecca effusively for the smallest achievements. My mother Eleanor, a former Miss Connecticut finalist, brought her pageant perfectionism into parenting. She scrutinized my appearance constantly. My posture wasn't straight enough. My clothes weren't fashionable enough. My social connections weren't prestigious enough. Meanwhile, she dedicated hours to coaching Rebecca on etiquette, appearance, and social climbing. "Your sister understands the importance of presentation," she'd say, dismissing my academic achievements with barely a glance. Rebecca, 3 years younger, basked in the glow of their adoration. She was naturally charismatic, conventionally attractive, and instinctively knew how to manipulate our parents. While I don't blame my sister for accepting their favoritism, she learned early to weaponize it against me. "Mom already said no to you, but I'll ask for both of us." She'd offer only to return with permission just for herself, a sympathetic pout masking her satisfaction. Only Grandpa Harrison saw through the family dynamics. My father's father had built the original family fortune through a commercial construction company. But unlike my parents, material wealth never corrupted his values. While my parents hosted extravagant dinner parties, Grandpa would invite me to his modest lake house where we'd fish and talk about life. "Money reveals character, it doesn't create it," he told me once when I was 15 after my parents had forgotten to attend my regional science competition, where I'd won first place. They'd been at Rebecca's dance recital, of course. Grandpa had shown up for me, beaming with pride, a camera in hand to document my achievement. Those photos still sit on my desk today. The pattern of favoritism pervaded every aspect of childhood. When I was 12, I qualified for an advanced science summer camp at MIT. A huge opportunity. $7,000 is excessive for a summer activity, my father declared. 3 months later, they spent $20,000 on Rebecca's ballet intensives in New York, plus a new wardrobe of designer clothes, because appearances matter in the arts. Family photo sessions became exercises in subtle emotional abuse. "Desmond, stand behind your sister," the photographer would direct, clearly instructed by my mother. In our family portrait gallery, Rebecca consistently occupied the center, often with our parents' hands on her shoulders, while I stood slightly apart, a visual reminder of my peripheral family status. Despite this, I excelled academically. Without my parents' emotional support, I developed resilience and self-motivation. I graduated top of my class in high school, earned a scholarship to Cornell for environmental engineering, and graduated with honors. My parents attended graduation but left early to attend Rebecca's sophomore voice recital at NYU. My career as an environmental engineer specializing in sustainable urban water systems brought me modest success and genuine fulfillment. I developed patents for water conservation systems used in commercial buildings across the Northeast. My work mattered and made a difference. Something Grandpa Harrison always emphasized was the true measure of success. "Your parents confuse wealth with worth," he told me during one of our fishing trips when I was in college. "That confusion has cost them more than they know." At the time, I didn't fully understand what he meant, but I would soon enough. Throughout adulthood, I maintained contact with my family despite the pain of our relationship. Monthly dinners, holiday gatherings, and family events were exercises in emotional restraint. I'd arrive hopeful each time that something had changed, only to leave with the same familiar ache. My girlfriend Allison, a pediatric nurse with an uncanny emotional intelligence, would comfort me afterward. "You keep giving them chances to be the parents you deserve," she'd observe, holding my hand. "That speaks to your character, not their parenting." Even as an adult with my own successful career, the pattern continued. When I was 29, I received a prestigious Environmental Innovation Award, mentioned it during a family dinner, and watched as my mother redirected the conversation to Rebecca's recent promotion at her marketing firm within 30 seconds. My father didn't even look up from his plate. In retrospect, perhaps I should have recognized that no inheritance, no matter how substantial, would finally earn me the parental recognition I'd sought my entire life. But hope is a persistent force, and part of me still believed that Grandpa Harrison's passing might somehow reset our family dynamics and finally bring some semblance of equality. I couldn't have imagined just how right and wrong that hope would prove to be. Grandpa Harrison passed away peacefully in his sleep 6 months ago at the respectable age of 87. Unlike the performative grieving I witnessed from my parents and sister, my mourning was deep and genuine. I'd lost not just a grandfather, but a mentor, a father figure who filled the emotional void my biological father created. The call about the family gathering came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was reviewing environmental impact assessments for a new sustainable housing development. My father's executive assistant, never my father directly, informed me that my presence was required at the family estate that weekend for important financial discussions regarding Harrison's estate. The formal, impersonal nature of the summons was typical of our relationship. I called Allison immediately after. "They're finally handling Grandpa's inheritance," I explained, feeling a complex mix of grief, anticipation, and dread. "Part of me hopes this might finally be the moment they see me as equal to Rebecca. Just remember, your worth isn't determined by their assessment," Allison reminded me, her voice gentle but firm. "I'll be just a phone call away if you need me." The drive from my Boston apartment to my parents' Greenwich estate took just over 3 hours, giving me ample time to process my emotions. The familiar Connecticut landscape triggered memories of childhood car rides sitting silently in the back while my parents gushed about Rebecca's latest accomplishment in the front seat. Turning onto the private road leading to my parents' property, I felt the familiar tightening in my chest. The sprawling colonial-style mansion emerged through the carefully manicured maple trees, its imposing facade, a physical manifestation of my father's success, and by extension, my inadequacy in his eyes. The circular driveway already contained several vehicles: my father's latest Mercedes sedan, my mother's Range Rover, Rebecca's BMW convertible, a gift for her 30th birthday, while I received a gift card for mine, and an unfamiliar Audi that I assumed belonged to Rebecca's newest boyfriend. Another car, a modest Toyota, likely belonged to the household staff. Maria, the housekeeper, who had always shown me small kindnesses throughout childhood, opened the door before I could ring the bell. "Mr. Desmond," she said with a warm smile, the only genuine welcome I would receive that day. "It's good to see you. Your family is in the great room." The house smelled of my mother's preferred floral arrangements, stargazer lilies overpowering and formal. Everything was immaculate, staged for impression rather than comfort. Family photos lined the hallway, the familiar visual narrative of Rebecca's centrality on full display. My father was standing by the fireplace, tumbler of scotch in hand, deep in conversation with Uncle Thomas, his younger brother, who had always lived somewhat in my father's shadow. My mother sat on the Italian leather sofa, back straight as a blade, inspecting her manicure while half listening to Aunt Judith, Uncle Thomas's wife. Rebecca was perched on the arm of the sofa, something my mother would scold anyone else for, scrolling through her phone, occasionally flashing practiced smiles at comments directed her way. "Desmond, you've arrived," my father announced without moving to greet me, his tone suggesting I was precisely on time rather than welcome. "We'll be discussing the financial matters after dinner." My mother glanced up, her eyes cataloging my appearance with practiced efficiency. "Your hair's getting rather long," she observed in place of a greeting. "Rebecca's new salon does wonderful men's cuts. You should have her recommend someone in Boston." Rebecca finally looked up from her phone, offering a hug that never quite connected emotionally. "Des, good to see you. Have you lost weight? You look," She paused, ensuring our mother was listening. Almost gaunt. "Are you eating properly?" Before I could respond, my cousin Marcus approached, offering a genuine handshake and respite from the immediate family dynamics. "Good to see you, man. It's been too long. How's that water recycling project in Cambridge going?" Dinner was served at 7, precisely the conversation flowing around me rather than including me. My father discussed market trends with Uncle Thomas. My mother orchestrated the impression of perfect family harmony, and Rebecca entertained everyone with stories from her marketing firm's celebrity client portfolio. Desmond, my Aunt Judith, attempted kindly tell us about your work. Rebecca mentioned you're doing something with water conservation. I began explaining our newest municipal project only to have my mother interrupt. Speaking of conservation, Rebecca's firm just signed a major environmental nonprofit. What was it called? Again, darling. The pattern was so familiar, I barely registered the pain anymore. I noticed Uncle Thomas watching this interaction closely. Something unreadable in his expression. Later that evening, as everyone retired to their rooms, I stepped onto the back terrace for fresh air and noticed an older gentleman arriving through the side entrance. Not a family member, but someone vaguely familiar. It took me a moment to recognize Mr. Patterson, Grandpa Harrison's longtime attorney. He carried a weathered leather briefcase and spoke in hushed tones with my father, whose expression shifted from confidence to something approaching concern. My mother joined them, her body language tense. I couldn't hear their conversation, but the animated hand gestures and my mother's increasingly pinched expression suggested the discussion wasn't proceeding as they'd expected. I retreated before they noticed me sending a quick text to Allison. "Something strange is happening. Grandpa's lawyer arrived secretly, and my parents seem upset." Her response came quickly. "Trust your instincts. Remember what your grandfather always told you about integrity." Sleep eluded me that night, my mind cycling through possibilities. By morning, I'd resigned myself to whatever announcement was coming, reminding myself that my worth wasn't contingent on my parents' financial decisions. Still, a persistent hope remained that perhaps finally there would be some acknowledgement of my equal place in the family. I couldn't have imagined how dramatically that day would transform everything I thought I knew about my family. The formal living room, used only for important family occasions and impressing guests, became the stage for the inheritance announcement. Heavy velvet curtains were drawn back to reveal the manicured gardens beyond floor-to-ceiling windows. Family photographs, carefully curated to present the image of perfect family harmony, adorned marble-topped side tables. We gathered on antique furniture arranged in a semicircle as if for a performance, which in many ways it was. My father stood before the ornate fireplace, commanding attention without having to ask for it. His tailored suit and perfect posture projected the authority he'd wielded over the family for decades. Mother sat at his right hand, a queen to his king, while Rebecca positioned herself prominently on the adjacent love seat, leaving me the furthest seat from the center of power. A physical manifestation of our family hierarchy. Mr. Patterson sat quietly in the corner, his expression professionally neutral as he arranged documents on his lap. I caught his eye briefly, and something in his glance, a slight softening, confused me. We're gathered today to honor Harrison's legacy and ensure his assets are distributed in accordance with proper family planning. My father began using his boardroom voice. He spoke about legacy and responsibility for several minutes, words like stewardship and prudent management featuring prominently. After careful consideration and consultation with financial advisors, he continued, making eye contact with everyone except me. We've determined that the most responsible approach to Harrison's $5 million estate is consolidated management rather than division. The room remained silent, though I noticed Uncle Thomas shift uncomfortably in his seat. Therefore, my father declared with finality, the entire inheritance will be placed under Rebecca's stewardship, as she has consistently demonstrated financial responsibility and alignment with family values. Though I'd spent a lifetime preparing for disappointment from my parents, the blatant exclusion still hit like a physical blow. $5 million. Not a single dollar designated for me. Not even a token amount to maintain the pretense of fairness. My mother, not content with my father's announcement, added her own dagger. "Desmond, perhaps this will motivate you to work harder like your sister. Environmental engineering is admirable, but hardly secure." Rebecca adopted an expression of practiced humility, dabbing at non-existent tears with a monogrammed handkerchief. "I'm overwhelmed by this responsibility," she announced to the room. "I promise to honor Grandpa's legacy." Then turning to me with a smile that never reached her eyes, "Don't worry, Des. I'll help you out sometimes." The condescension in her tone made it clear that any help would come with strings attached, public gratitude, submission, acknowledgement of her superiority, the same dynamic we'd had since childhood. The room swam before me as blood rushed in my ears. 32 years of similar moments flashed through my mind. My 10th birthday overshadowed by Rebecca's dance recital, my college acceptance letter ignored, while her middle school art prize was framed my professional award, unacknowledged while her promotion warranted a family celebration. My chest tightened painfully, each breath requiring conscious effort. The inheritance itself wasn't the issue. I'd built my own career and financial stability. It was what the decision represented, the final, irrefutable confirmation that in my parents' eyes, I would always be worth less than my sister. Uncle Thomas cleared his throat, looking like he might speak, but my father continued outlining how the assets would be managed and invested. My mother beamed at Rebecca, who maintained her facade of humble gratitude, while occasionally glancing at me, gauging my reaction. Aunt Judith reached over and briefly squeezed my hand, a small gesture of support that nearly broke my carefully maintained composure. Marcus, my cousin, stared at the floor, clearly uncomfortable with the blatant favoritism. After what felt like hours but was likely only minutes, I quietly stood dignity, the only thing I had left to preserve. "Congratulations, Rebecca." I managed my voice steadier than I felt. "If you'll excuse me, I need some air." The whispers began immediately as I moved toward the door. My mother's disapproving hiss, always so dramatic, followed me along with my father's dismissive sigh. Rebecca called after me, her voice honey sweet. For our audience, "Desmond, don't leave. We're family." The performance of caring sister while accepting everything that should have been shared equally was perhaps the cruelest cut. I continued walking, each step requiring immense control not to run from the house entirely. Just as I reached the doorway, Mr. Patterson's voice cut through the murmurs. "Actually, if everyone could please remain seated. We're not quite finished with today's business." Something in his tone, authoritative yet almost anticipatory, made me pause. I turned back, noticing my father's expression shift from satisfaction to confusion. "There's more to Harrison's estate than has been discussed thus far." Mr. Patterson continued, standing and retrieving additional documents from his briefcase. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly, as if the air pressure had dropped before a storm. My mother's perfectly composed expression faltered, and for the first time that day she looked directly at me, not with her usual disappointment, but with something approaching concern. I returned to my seat, a strange sense of apprehension and possibility replacing my resignation. Whatever was coming next, I realized, had not been part of my parents' carefully orchestrated plan. Before proceeding further, Mr. 7. Patterson announced, his professional demeanor taking on a new authority. "I must clarify that the $5 million just discussed represents only the visible portion of Harrison Montgomery's estate, the portion he specifically left under William and Eleanor's discretionary control." My father's posture stiffened. "What are you talking about, Patterson? We've reviewed all the documentation." "You reviewed what Harrison intended you to see," Mr. Patterson replied calmly, removing a sealed envelope from his briefcase. "Your father maintained a separate will and substantial holdings unknown to you, with explicit instructions regarding their disclosure and distribution." The room fell completely silent. Even Rebecca stopped her performative, sniffling, her attention suddenly razor sharp. "Harrison asked me to read this letter in the presence of the entire family." Mr. Patterson continued, breaking the seal on the envelope. He cleared his throat and began. "To my family, if this letter is being read, I have passed on, but not before making careful arrangements for my true legacy. For years I have watched with growing disappointment as wealth corrupted the values I tried to instill in my son William, and by extension, how those corrupted values have poisoned our family dynamics. William and Eleanor, you have consistently favored Rebecca while dismissing Desmond's worth, his accomplishments, and his character. You have mistaken material success for character and status for integrity. This disappointment has been my greatest sorrow. What you didn't know is that the majority of my wealth has been carefully sheltered in a separate trust unknown to you, growing substantially over the years. The $5 million you believed constituted my estate was merely what I allowed you to see. My true estate, valued at $55 million, reflects my life's work and investment success. Based on my observations over decades, I have made my decision regarding its distribution. My father interrupted, face flushing deep red. This is preposterous. Legally, Mr. Patterson interjected firmly, everything is meticulously documented and unassailable. Harrison ensured that. Please allow me to finish. My mother's hand gripped the armrest, her knuckles white against her otherwise perfectly manicured appearance. Mr. Patterson continued reading. To my grandson Desmond, you have demonstrated integrity, resilience, and character. Despite receiving little support or acknowledgement from your parents, you've built a meaningful career focused on improving the world rather than merely accumulating status. You've maintained compassion, despite unfair treatment. Therefore, I leave the entirety of my $55 million estate to you with the confidence that you will manage it with the same integrity you've shown throughout your life. The letter continued, but it was drowned out by my mother's shriek. You can't do this to me. She turned to my father. William, stop this immediately. Mr. Patterson paused, then firmly continued over her objections. This decision isn't made lightly or out of spite, but from careful observation. I've documented 30 years of systematic favoritism, emotional manipulation, and unequal treatment. These records, including financial discrepancies in educational support gift values and emotional investment, have been notarized and will stand against any legal challenge. Rebecca's composure shattered completely. This is insane. I'm the one who visited him every month, who called him weekly. Actually, Mr. Patterson commented, temporarily departing from the letter. Harrison documented those visits too, noting they increased substantially after he mentioned reviewing his estate planning to you 3 years ago. He also recorded that your conversations centered primarily around your material needs and social connections, rarely inquiring about his well-being. He turned back to the letter. To ensure transparency, I've instructed Mr. Patterson to provide detailed documentation of my observations to everyone present. William and Eleanor, you have consistently valued appearances over substance, status over character. This inheritance decision reflects my hope that you might finally recognize the consequences of these misplaced values. Mr. Patterson then withdrew a certified check from his briefcase and walked directly to me. Harrison asked me to present this to you personally. Desmond, $55 million with the associated trust documentation to follow. I stared at the check in complete shock, unable to process what was happening. The amount was staggering, but even more overwhelming was the validation, after a lifetime of being treated as less than my grandfather had seen me, truly seen me. My father surged to his feet. This is manipulation. Patterson, you've overstepped. I'll have your license for this. Every aspect of this arrangement has been reviewed by the state's top estate attorneys, Mr. Patterson replied calmly. Harrison anticipated your reaction and prepared accordingly. My mother turned to me, her expression morphing from shock to calculated warmth with terrifying speed. Desmond, darling, surely you understand this isn't what your grandfather truly wanted. Family resources should remain equally distributed. The irony of her suddenly advocating for equality when minutes earlier she had supported giving everything to Rebecca wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Rebecca's transformation was even more dramatic. Her previous condescension vanished, replaced by wide-eyed appeal. Des, we've always been close. You know, I was just playing along with Mom and Dad's decisions. We should split this like real siblings would. The naked insincerity turned my stomach. Uncle Thomas gave a low whistle, shaking his head at the rapid shift in family dynamics. Mr. Patterson handed me a thick sealed envelope. Harrison also left this for your eyes only. He suggested you read it privately. I clutched the envelope, still struggling to process everything. The family erupted around me. My father threatening lawsuits, my mother oscillating between fury and manipulative appeals. Rebecca crying while simultaneously calculating her next approach. The extended family watched in stunned silence decades of carefully maintained family mythology crumbling before their eyes. Through it all, I felt a strange sense of peace beginning to form beneath the shock. Grandpa Harrison had seen everything understood. Everything. And in his final act, had forced the truth into the light. The inheritance was secondary to this gift. The validation that I wasn't crazy, that the lifetime of subtle and not-so-subtle diminishment had been real and that someone had cared enough to address it. As chaos swirled around me, I carefully folded the check and placed it in my wallet alongside the sealed letter. Whatever came next would be on completely new terms. Terms that, for the first time in my life, I would help define. My mother recovered from her initial shock with frightening speed, her socialite training kicking in as she attempted to regain control of the situation. "This is clearly a misunderstanding we can resolve as a family," she announced, her voice honey sweet but eyes calculating. "Desmond, let's discuss this privately." "There's nothing to discuss privately," I replied, finding my voice strengthening with each word. Grandpa made his wishes clear, and after a lifetime of being treated as less valuable than Rebecca, I don't owe anyone here a private negotiation. My father's face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful," he began before catching himself, visibly remembering there were witnesses. "Son," he continued, forcing his voice to soften unconvincingly, "your grandfather was clearly manipulated in his final years. This will devastate your sister." "The same sister who just received $5 million while I received nothing?" I asked quietly. "The same sister who's had every advantage, every opportunity, every ounce of your support while I was told to work harder despite building a successful career on my own." Rebecca employed a different tactic, tears streaming perfectly down her cheeks without disturbing her makeup. "I always loved you, Des. How can you do this to me? To us as siblings. When have we ever been treated as equal siblings?" I countered, decades of suppressed truth finally finding release. "When did you ever stand up for me when they dismissed my achievements? When did you ever acknowledge the inequality in how we were treated?" My mother interjected sharply. "We're not discussing this in front of the extended family." Her greatest fear had always been the facade cracking, the carefully cultivated family image being exposed as fiction. "Why not?" Uncle Thomas suddenly spoke up, surprising everyone. "I've watched this dynamic for 30 years, Eleanor. Maybe it's time for some honesty." My father rounded on his brother. "Stay out of this, Thomas. This doesn't concern you." "Harrison was my father too," Uncle Thomas replied evenly. "And I've seen how you've treated Desmond compared to Rebecca since they were children. The Christmas when Desmond was 8 and received practical clothes while Rebecca got that expensive dollhouse. The high school graduation where you threw Rebecca a lavish party but took Desmond to a restaurant as an afterthought. The constant praise for her while ignoring his achievements. I said nothing then, and I've regretted it." My mother's face flushed with anger. "How dare you? We've always treated both children fairly according to their needs and capabilities." "According to your perception of their capabilities," Aunt Judith corrected gently. "Or perhaps according to which child better reflected the image you wanted to project." Rebecca, sensing the tide turning, changed tactics again. "Desmond, be reasonable," she pleaded. "Think about what this money could do for all of us together as a family." "The same family that 5 minutes ago thought it was perfectly reasonable for you to receive everything while I received nothing?" I asked. My father, recognizing that emotional appeals weren't working, shifted to threats. "I'll contest this in court. You'll be tied up in litigation for years." Mr. Patterson, who had remained professionally silent during the exchange, spoke up. William Harrison anticipated this reaction. The documentation he assembled regarding the pattern of favoritism and emotional manipulation would become public record in any court challenge. "Are you prepared for that scrutiny?" My father's expression faltered as the implications sank in. Public exposure of their family dynamics would devastate the carefully cultivated social reputation my parents had built. My mother tried one final approach, moving to sit beside me, placing her hand on mine in a gesture of maternal affection so unfamiliar it felt alien. "Desmond, darling, we've always wanted what's best for you. Perhaps we pushed Rebecca more, because you were already so capable. Independent. You didn't seem to need the same guidance. The gaslighting was so transparent it almost made me laugh. That's not guidance, Mother. That's attention. That's love. That's the basic acknowledgement that I matter as much as Rebecca, something I've never received from either of you. She withdrew her hand as if burned her facade, cracking to reveal the cold calculation beneath. You've made your choice then. If you proceed with this theft of what should be family resources, don't expect to remain part of this family. The ultimatum hung in the air, breathtaking in its nakedness. After decades of conditional love, my mother had finally made the condition explicit my compliance, in exchange for their acceptance. I've never been a full part of this family, I replied, standing up. Not really. I've been adjacent to it, watching Rebecca receive the love and support I desperately wanted. The sad thing is, I would have shared this inheritance if you had ever treated me as an equal member of this family. But this ultimatum makes it clear that was never going to happen. Rebecca began sobbing dramatically. My father put his arm around her while glaring at me, and my mother stood rigid with fury. The three of them unified, as always, with me on the outside. Mr. Patterson, I said, turning to the attorney, thank you for executing my grandfather's wishes. I'll be in touch regarding the trust documentation. I walked out of the room with as much dignity as I could muster, though my hands trembled and my heart raced. Behind me, I could hear my mother's voice rising, my father's angry responses, Rebecca's theatrical crying. The family mythology was crumbling, and the raw truth beneath was ugly indeed. Uncle Thomas followed me to the foyer. Desmond, he said quietly, for what it's worth, I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. Your grandfather saw what the rest of us were too cowardly to acknowledge. I nodded, unable to form words past the emotion constricting my throat. Take some time, he continued. But when you're ready, I'd like to be part of your life. No strings, no expectations, just family the way it should have been all along. The drive home passed in a blur of conflicting emotions, vindication, grief, shock, and a strange sense of liberation. I pulled over twice when tears made it impossible to see the road. I called Allison when I reached a rest stop, my voice breaking as I tried to explain what had happened. Come home, she said simply. Whatever happens next, we'll figure it out together. By the time I reached my apartment, exhaustion had replaced the adrenaline. Allison was waiting, arms open, no questions, just support. We sat on my balcony until dawn, talking through the implications, the emotions, the future that had suddenly expanded with possibilities I'd never dared imagine. Your grandfather gave you more than money, Allison observed as the first light broke over the Boston skyline. He gave you the truth. And sometimes that's the most valuable inheritance of all. The weeks following the inheritance revelation passed in a whirlwind of meetings with financial advisors, attorneys, and trust managers. The magnitude of Grandpa Harrison's estate became clearer with each discussion. Not just the $55 million figure that had shocked the family, but extensive real estate holdings, investment portfolios and business, interests carefully accumulated and managed over decades. Your grandfather was quite the strategic investor, explained Marissa Chen, the chief financial advisor assigned to my account. He began separating these assets from his visible portfolio nearly 20 years ago, apparently, after observing some concerning family dynamics. 20 years ago, around the time my parents had dismissed my academic scholarship while financing Rebecca's semester abroad, Grandpa had been watching, evaluating planning even then. During a private moment, I finally opened the sealed letter he had left, specifically for me. Desmond, if you're reading this, then the truth has finally come to light. This isn't about money. It never was. It's about recognizing worth beyond material success or social status. Your parents lost sight of this essential truth, and I watched with growing concern as they perpetuated the same warped values with their children. The money I've left you comes with no strings, no expectations beyond this. Use it in ways that align with your character. Don't let it change who you are, but rather, amplify the good you can do. Success isn't measured by accounts or accolades, but by impact and integrity. Your parents and sister will likely react poorly to this revelation. Remember that their reaction reflects their values, not your worth. Set boundaries where necessary, Extend grace where possible, but never compromise your self-respect. I've arranged for Thomas to serve as an advisor to the trust, if you wish. Unlike your father, he never lost sight of what truly matters, though he sometimes lacked the courage to stand against William's stronger personality. You have always been enough, Desmond. The tragedy is that your parents couldn't see it. With pride and love, Grandpa Harrison. The letter became my touchstone in the weeks that followed as my parents' response evolved from threats to manipulation to awkward attempts at reconciliation. First came the legal threats, formal letters from my father's attorneys challenging the validity of Grandpa's separate will. Mr. Patterson calmly countered each one, finally sending a sample of the documented evidence Grandpa had accumulated over the years. Photos of childhood events my parents had missed, financial records, showing the disparity in their support, even transcripts of conversations where they had openly discussed their preference for Rebecca. The legal challenges quietly disappeared. Next came Rebecca's social media campaign, painting herself as the victim of an unbalanced elderly man's decision and a greedy brother. Mutual acquaintances forwarded me screenshots of her posts filled with manufactured memories of her devotion to Grandpa and vague allegations about my manipulation. I maintained my silence, recognizing the desperate attempt to control the narrative. My mother tried a different approach, sending increasingly warm messages inviting me to heal our family rift over dinner at exclusive restaurants. Each message carefully avoided any acknowledgement of past behavior, instead focusing on moving forward positively, without the accountability that might make such movement possible. I responded politely but firmly to each overture. I'm open to rebuilding our relationship when it can be based on mutual respect and acknowledgement of the past. I don't require apologies, but I do need honesty. No such honesty was forthcoming. Meanwhile, I began the work of determining how to use my inheritance in ways that honored Grandpa's legacy. The first decision was creating the Harrison Montgomery Environmental Innovation Foundation, dedicated to funding promising water conservation technologies in developing regions. The announcement generated significant positive press, with several major news outlets covering the foundation's mission. My parents' social circle, where they had long presented themselves as philanthropic leaders, took notice. Invitations to their charity events declined as the foundation gained prominence. My mother's carefully cultivated position on several prestigious boards suddenly seemed less secure. But the most significant moment came 6 months after the inheritance revelation, when my financial team alerted me to an opportunity I hadn't anticipated. My father's company, Montgomery Development Group, was facing serious financial difficulties due to a combination of market downturns and what my advisors delicately termed management issues. The company will likely be available for acquisition at a significant discount within the next quarter, my advisor explained. Given your background in environmental engineering, there's potential to restructure it towards sustainable development. The idea of acquiring my father's life's work, the company he had prioritized over family relationships, the source of the status he valued above all else, wasn't something I'd considered. My initial reaction was to dismiss it outright, wanting nothing to do with anything connected to the painful past. But a conversation with Uncle Thomas changed my perspective. "It's not about revenge, Desmond," he said as we shared lunch at a quiet Boston restaurant. "It's about transformation. William built that company on cutting corners and prestige projects with little regard for environmental impact. You could transform it into something that actually contributes positively. He'd see it as a hostile takeover," I pointed out. "Probably," Uncle Thomas acknowledged. "But is that a reason not to do something that makes business sense and aligns with your values? Are you still making decisions based on William's potential reactions?" That observation hit home. I was still unconsciously orienting my choices around my father's approval or disapproval. 3 weeks later, through a series of carefully structured transactions that concealed my involvement, until the final stage, I acquired controlling interest in Montgomery Development Group. The business press covered the acquisition extensively, noting the irony of the founder's son taking control. My father requested a meeting the day after the acquisition was announced. We met in what had been his office, now temporarily mine, while I restructured the company. He arrived precisely on time, the same commanding presence I had feared, and sought approval from throughout childhood. Though, now I noticed the new lines around his eyes, the slight slump in his formerly perfect posture. "I assume this is your revenge," he said without preamble, declining to sit in the visitor's chair across from what had been his desk. This is business, I replied calmly. The company was underperforming and undervalued. With my background in environmental engineering, I can reposition it for the growing sustainable development market. You'll destroy everything I built, he said, a note of genuine fear beneath the anger. Actually, I plan to rebuild it, I corrected him, starting with the Taylor Street project. His expression flickered. The Taylor Street development had been his latest prestige project, a luxury high-rise with little consideration for environmental impact or community needs. We're redesigning it as a mixed-income net-zero energy community with integrated water reclamation systems. The profitability projections are actually higher than your original plan, with significantly better community impact and municipal support. For a moment, something like uncertainty crossed his face. The possibility that his son might actually succeed where he had begun to fail. But his pride quickly reasserted itself. You have no idea what you're doing. You'll come begging for my help within 6 months. That's always been your assessment of me, I acknowledged. And yet here we are. As he turned to leave, I added, Dad, despite everything, the door remains open for a relationship based on mutual respect, not as business associates, but as family. That's your choice to make. He left without responding. My mother's reaction played out differently through a series of social maneuvers attempting to claim credit for my success and philanthropic work. At charity events she managed to attend, she spoke glowingly of how she had always encouraged Desmond's environmental interests. The transparent revisionism might have hurt once. Now it merely confirmed the wisdom of maintaining boundaries. Rebecca made one final attempt at manipulation, appearing unannounced at my office with tears and reminiscences about our special sibling bond. When gentle redirection failed, I was finally direct. Rebecca, you have $5 million and every advantage our parents could provide. I wish you well, but our relationship can only continue if you recognize the reality of our past, not the story you've created. She left in anger, later sending a lengthy email accusing me of destroying the family, the same family that had systematically marginalized me for decades. Throughout this period, Allison remained my emotional anchor, providing perspective when bitterness threatened to overwhelm me, celebrating genuine successes and reminding me that the best revenge wasn't financial or social dominance, but living authentically. Your grandfather gave you the means to live according to your values, she observed one evening as we walked along the Charles River. That's the real inheritance. The freedom to become fully yourself without seeking their validation. In the midst of business restructuring and family drama, I returned often to Grandpa Harrison's letter, particularly one line that seemed to gain meaning with each passing month. Success isn't measured by accounts or accolades, but by impact and integrity. By those measures, the only ones that truly mattered, I was finally beginning to feel successful. 6 months after the inheritance revelation that transformed my life, I stood on the balcony of my new Cambridge home, watching the sunset over the Charles River. The modest but comfortable house reflected my values. Environmentally sustainable, warm, designed for living rather than impressing others. Despite having the means for extravagance, I'd chosen simplicity, another lesson from Grandpa Harrison. Wealth can be a tool or a trap, he'd told me once. The difference lies in whether you control it or it controls you. The journey to healing hadn't been straightforward. Despite the vindication of Grandpa's actions, 32 years of emotional neglect doesn't vanish overnight. With Allison's encouragement, I'd begun working with Dr. James Bennett, a therapist specializing in family trauma, who helped me navigate the complex emotions, the lingering desire for parental approval, the anger at decades of slash, unfair treatment, the guilt over feelings of satisfaction at the family's comeuppance. What you're experiencing is normal, Dr. Bennett assured me during one particularly difficult session. You're mourning the family you deserved, but never had, while simultaneously building a new understanding of yourself outside their definition. That new understanding included recognizing my own value independent of external validation, perhaps the most challenging and liberating aspect of the journey. The Harrison Montgomery Environmental Innovation Foundation had become my primary focus, funding promising water conservation technologies in regions facing critical shortages. We'd already launched pilot programs in 3 countries with early results exceeding expectations. The work connected me to a global community of innovators and changemakers whose values aligned with mine, the family of choice that had begun to fill the void left by biological relations. Uncle Thomas had become an unexpected source of support and connection to my past. Our monthly lunches evolved into a genuine friendship as he shared stories about Grandpa Harrison's younger years and acknowledged the family dynamics he had observed but failed to address. "I always saw how they treated you compared to Rebecca," he admitted during one such lunch. "I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere, but that was cowardice. You deserved an advocate." "You're being that advocate now," I assured him. Some relationships heal through time rather than perfect timing. My relationship with my parents remained complicated. After multiple failed attempts at manipulating their way back into my financial orbit, they had finally recognized that their former power dynamics would never return. My father maintained his distance, his pride preventing him from accepting a relationship where he wasn't in control. My mother occasionally reached out with carefully worded messages that never quite acknowledged the past, but suggested she might be slowly recognizing reality. People can change. Dr. Bennett had noted when I shared these messages. But meaningful change requires acknowledging the behavior that needs changing. Without that foundation, apparent changes are usually just tactical adjustments. Rebecca had taken the most surprising path. After several months of social media campaigns painting herself as the victim, she'd unexpectedly reached out with a different tone entirely. "I've been doing some thinking," her message began. "I never questioned why Mom and Dad treated us so differently. I just accepted the benefits without considering what it cost you. I'm not saying this to get anything from you. I know that bridge is probably burned, but I thought you should know I'm starting to understand." I approached the message with cautious optimism, agreeing to a coffee meeting with clear boundaries established. Our conversation was awkward, but contained moments of genuine connection, as Rebecca, perhaps for the first time, spoke without our parents' script influencing her words. "They're still trying to control my narrative about what happened," she admitted. "Mom keeps coaching me on what to say to you, how to bring you back to the family. I'm starting to see how manipulative that is." While one conversation couldn't erase decades of ingrained patterns, it suggested the possibility of a more authentic relationship in the future, not the idealized sibling bond our parents had pretended existed, but perhaps something honest and newly constructed. The most profound change, however, had been in my relationship with Allison. Her unwavering support throughout the family upheaval had deepened our connection in ways neither of us had anticipated. "You never once asked about the money," I observed one evening as we prepared dinner together. "Even when everything was chaotic, you focused on how I was feeling, not what I was inheriting." "Because the money was never the point," she replied simply. "It was about your grandfather seeing you, really seeing you, when your parents couldn't or wouldn't. That recognition was the real gift." 3 weeks later, I proposed during a weekend at Grandpa Harrison's lake house, the one property from his estate I'd kept for its emotional significance rather than financial value. Allison's yes, immediate and certain, marked another step in building the life I wanted rather than the one my parents had deemed appropriate. Perhaps the most meaningful use of the inheritance came through establishing a counseling foundation, providing therapy services to young adults from emotionally neglectful families. Visible, the Harrison Montgomery Foundation for Family Healing operated on the principle that being truly seen and valued is fundamental to human development. "Your grandfather's legacy isn't just financial," Dr. Bennett observed when I shared the foundation's mission. "It's the recognition that healing often begins when someone finally acknowledges the reality you've experienced but couldn't name. That recognition, the validation that my perceptions of family dynamics weren't wrong or oversensitive but painfully accurate, remained Grandpa Harrison's most precious gift. The money provided freedom and opportunity, but his acknowledgement provided something money couldn't buy: the foundation for genuine self-worth. As I watched the final rays of sunset reflect off the river, I thought about the complex journey from that shocking inheritance announcement to the life I was building now. The pain hadn't disappeared completely. Such deep wounds never vanish entirely, but it had transformed into something approaching wisdom. True wealth, I'd learned, isn't measured in dollars but in authenticity and relationships, based on mutual respect, rather than power dynamics, and the freedom to live according to your values, without seeking external validation. Grandpa Harrison hadn't just left me money. He'd left me the template for a life of integrity. If you've ever felt unseen or unvalued by those who should have cherished you most, I hope my story offers some comfort. Sometimes, validation comes from unexpected sources. Sometimes the family we create matters more than the family we're born into. And sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't what's left to us, but what we choose to become, despite the challenges we've faced. Have you ever experienced favoritism in your family? How did you handle it? Share your experiences in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you. Remember, your worth isn't determined by others' inability to see it. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the courage to claim your own value, regardless of who fails to recognize it.